The views and opinions expressed on any program are those of the producers and/or the persons appearing on the program and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of FRC Media, Bristol Community College, or the City of Fall River.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike O'Sullivan. I'm the CEO of One SouthCoast Chamber, and I would like to welcome you to our congressional update with Jake Auchicnloss. In an effort to stay within our time frame, we're going to get started. And out of courtesy for our program agenda, let's turn off our cell phones or at least put them on silent mode. In a few minutes, we'll be hearing from Congressman Auchincloss. On the tables are pens and index cards. Please write down any questions you have for the Congressman, and a member of the Chamber staff will be around to collect it. Just kind of wave it a little bit. Is that better? But before we continue, on behalf of the Chamber, we would like to extend our appreciation to our sponsor, Fall River Municipal Credit Union. Matt Shondak is right over here. Their support of this program reflects their dedication to our communities, and we're very grateful for it. So thank you, Matt. Congressman Auchincloss is serving his second term representing the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. In addition to his work on the committees for transportation and infrastructure and the select committees on strategic competition between the United States and China, his areas of focus include healthcare, clean energy, gun violence, and building a strong middle class. Jake was born and raised in Newton, Massachusetts, the son of a surgeon and a scientist. They showed him the value of curiosity and hard work, and from the moment he could read, Jake loved American history. After graduating from Harvard College, Jake joined the Marines. He commanded infantry in Afghanistan and special ops in Panama. Upon returning home, Jake continued his service as a 3-term city councilor in Newton. While working at City Hall on nights and weekends, Jake built a career in business, running product development at both a Fortune 100 insurance company and a cybersecurity startup. He has degrees in economics and finance from Harvard University and MIT Sloan. Today, Jake lives in Newton with his wife, Michelle, and their children, Teddy, Grace, and Audrey, along with their lab, Donut, which is a great name. It's an absolutely great name for a dog. And am I mistaken? Is he a chocolate lab?
Silver lab.
Silver lab. Okay, so I got that wrong, but that's okay. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome Congressman Jake Auchicnloss. I'm just going to give that to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Good afternoon. It's really a pleasure to be back to One South Coast. I believe the last time I was here, I was wearing a mask because I had just been exposed to COVID, courtesy of the President of the United States. It's all right, still a fan. I really want to use most of our time to hear comments and questions from the assembled here, whether note cards or just raising your hand. But I do want to start off by addressing really two challenges that I see right now.
You can't hide, you're still funding genocide. How many children have to die before you call for ceasefire? Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now.
Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. How many kids have you killed today? Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. How many kids have you killed today? Yes, it is. It's private property, and your tax dollars are killing children right now. Bye. Yes. Have a nice life. Hope you enjoy the night.
That happens a fair bit to me. And we can get into national, international issues, comments, and questions, but I want to start local. I want to start with two challenges and two opportunities that I see facing South Coast, Massachusetts right now, with the idea being to lay the groundwork for a conversation. So let's really dig right into it. The two challenges that I'm seeing that have federal intersections right now. The first, of course, is the bridge. the bridge in Providence, Rhode Island, which the latest briefing from the governor of Rhode Island is that it's going to have to be fully replaced, and the timeline that they have set up is 2026. And I am keenly aware of the impact that this is having on constituents in southeastern Massachusetts, on small business owners who may live in southeastern Massachusetts but whose businesses are in Rhode Island, and also to the health and human services infrastructure for South Coastal Massachusetts. For example, I was just at a Fall River Elementary School this morning, was talking to a 15-year educator who is particularly focused on helping English as a learning language students. And she was saying that her commute, she lives in Rhode Island, I asked her about the bridge, she said her commute has gone from 30 minutes to an hour and 10 minutes every single day, both directions, right? She's got an 8-year-old child at home, and when she saw the 2026 timeline from the governor, she thought, it's time for me to get a new job. And that hurts. And it's really been painful. We're hearing about it in my district. I'm working closely with Representative Amo, who represents that district in Rhode Island, as well as Representative Magaziner, who represents the other district in Rhode Island. And as a member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I have raised this with the Federal Highways Administrator and underscored the urgency to get this done quickly and safely. Secretary Buttigieg recently visited, made clear that the federal government would support the replacement of this bridge. And clearly, money, 80%, I think it should be the floor of the funding for the $200 to $300 million is critical, but speed is just as critical as the funding. We saw in Pennsylvania when the highway collapsed or degraded that they got that done in weeks, not years. And this is a bridge, this is more technically complicated, but the same sense of urgency, I think, needs to impel the bridge reconstruction going forward. And I'm going to be absolutely committed to both the funding and the sense of urgency being imparted for that, because that's really that's a South Coastal New England challenge. That's not just a Rhode Island challenge. That affects us here, too. And let me just, one thing to add there. Representative Amo, he's new. He just got elected a couple months ago in a special, and he's hit the ground running on this issue. Coincidentally, his job was head of deputy, I think, for intergovernmental relations for the White House. So his job was like the guy at the White House who dealt with state and local officials who were asking for things from the states that had problems. So he is well situated for this role, and I think is going to be a good quarterback for the federal effort. Second great challenge that we're facing right now that has a federal intersection in South Coast Massachusetts is Steward, and what's happened with the Steward implosion. This has really been yet another episode and a concerning trend over the last several years where my constituents in southeastern Massachusetts are having a harder and harder time accessing particularly secondary and tertiary level care. We are making progress on some fronts there. Sturdy Hospital just got, I believe, $2.5 million in Attleboro to expand its emergency room and mental health inpatient resources. That's critically important. I was able to secure some resources for Manat Community Health Centers in Taunton and Attleboro to provide more care. But of course, in Fall River and New Bedford, the Steward hospital system and the physician-led practices are a key component of providing access to patients. And we need to have really a three-step approach to handling the Steward fallout. And it's going to require federal and state collaboration. The first is triage, is making sure that there is minimal disruption to actual patient access, and that's going to mean collaboration with other medical providers. The second is accountability. It's understanding if there is either civil or criminal wrongdoing on the part of Steward leadership that needs to be rectified. And the third is policy changes. What might need to be different to ensure both access for patients in southeastern Massachusetts as well as more transparency and front-end coordination to prevent these kinds of fire drills going forward. A lot of this is being driven at the state level, but the federal intersection that is most important to me is ownership of, in particular, these two physician-led practices. So Steward Healthcare really has a three-legged stool. It's got the real estate, it's got the hospital, and then it's got two physician-led practices. And the two physician-led practices are, frankly, the assets of that portfolio. The other two are not revenue generating in a meaningful way. And my concern is, and there are indications that this could be happening, is that an outside entity, United Healthcare or a major hospital system that's not organic to Southeastern Mass, might come in and purchase just the physician-led practices, but not the real estate or the hospitals. Take the assets out of the portfolio, corporatize them, extract value without adding value back in, because we need a holistic solution for Southeastern Massachusetts. It's the real estate, it's the hospitals, it's the physician-led practices, and they need to be mutually reinforcing. And I'm not going to be prescriptive about the right way that this gets resolved, but what I am going to care about is that some massive outside entity does not come in and try to strip off the assets, extract value, and leave patients high and dry in South Coast. If it's going to, as this gets wound down, as this gets resolved, it needs to be organic to Southeastern Massachusetts in a way that's comprehensive and that's putting patients at the center of it. Let's move on to the two great opportunities that I see for South Coastal New England that have a federal intersection. The first is, I think we've got some really strong economic tailwinds for this region. And in particular, let me talk about three. And I want to give specifics because I think we're all familiar with the broad tailwinds, but I want to give specifics about areas where I see that we can double down. The first is marine science and technology. I think this is going to be a surprise to nobody in this room. Between the port and fishing, Woods Hole, marine biology research, UMass Dartmouth, naval contracting, offshore wind, we all kind of know and sense that there is the potential for a cluster, a mutually reinforcing blue economy cluster here in Southeastern Massachusetts. And I think we are already seeing civil society organizations help coordinate that, the Blue Economy Initiative and others. This is all good. Let me point to one in particular that I think can also help turbocharge this. The United States Navy is going to buy a lot of unmanned maritime drones over the next decade. I'm making that prediction right now, and I think you can take that prediction to the bank. What we are seeing in the Black Sea near Ukraine, what we are seeing in U.S. naval exercises in the Indo-Pacific, is that there is a growing realization that, yes, we need our big aircraft carriers, yes, we need our nuclear submarines, yes, we need our surface-to-surface long-range missiles for naval engagements, but a big missing component is going to be relatively cheap hardware for maritime systems infused with autonomy and AI that allows them to sense, swarm, surveil, strike, disperse. The Ukrainians are already using that in the Black Sea. The Indo-Pacific Command is already experimenting with this in basically China containment exercises. And the Pentagon is just starting to put this into its procurement line items. This is a huge opportunity for Massachusetts, and particularly for Southeast Massachusetts. I'm looking at UMass Dartmouth over here, who's already, I know, thinking about this. For a lot of obvious reasons, this stuff needs to be bought largely within the United States. And it's this fusion of precision manufacturing of the hardware along with the software development capabilities, as well as the feedback loops with procurement at the Pentagon. And that's a muscle memory that this region has between Newport and other areas. We have that muscle memory here. We've got the talent here. And I think we can bring it all together to really create an unmanned maritime cluster that kind of rivals what Tulsa, Oklahoma is trying to build for unmanned aerial systems clusters. And I'm working with a number of companies to be supportive as they have federal contracts, because really the best thing we can do is just actually get procurement contracts drafted with the Pentagon and start charging revenue into the region. The second tailwind that I see, again, I think this audience is familiar with it, is medical device manufacturing. As I tour businesses throughout Southeastern Massachusetts, I see that med tech companies are increasingly drawn to this region based on this legacy of precision manufacturing that exists here, and the relatively pro-growth municipal environment that they're coming into. And I think this is a growth sector as well for here. I think that we're seeing that only 2 states in the country right now are really competing at Massachusetts level for medical device manufacturing in terms of the number of businesses that we have here and the talent. It's really us and Minnesota. And we're neck and neck right now. We can double down and advance going forward. And I've been a strong supporter of the med tech device industry, just recently working with the EPA to ensure that regulations they're putting in place are not going to unduly impair our med device industry here. The final thing I'll point out in terms of the tailwinds is biomanufacturing. And here again, I'll try to be specific. What we're seeing is the mass biomedical initiatives are based in Worcester, out of UMass in Worcester, but they are trying to create a regional biomanufacturing strategy. And I think southeastern Massachusetts can be one of the hubs in a regional biomanufacturing strategy. And this is going to be another huge growth edge for Massachusetts. We have a thriving biopharmaceutical sector here in Massachusetts. A lot of the R&D is centralized in Boston and Cambridge, although increasingly that's coming out into Watertown and Waltham as well. I think the R&D is likely to stay pretty concentrated because it benefits from some of that bump factor where people really want to have their scientists co-located with each other. But what we are seeing as we move from small molecule development, which is basically like these big pill factories, largely which is done in China and India now, the growth edge of science is large molecule development. It's instead of basically large scale manufacturing that's rote, it is much more fine-grained, where the feedback loop between R&D and process manufacturing is much tighter. It's large, complicated biologics, and there has to be a lot of quality assurance, and there needs to be a more skilled workforce to do that biomanufacturing. That needs to happen closer to the R&D hubs. That's not something that companies that are doing the R&D here in Boston are going to be okay with China or India doing a continent away. For one, the feedback loops are too long, but for two, there's increasingly concerns about the national security element of that. And in fact, there's legislation right now in Congress that would cut off some of the ties between Chinese domiciled biomanufacturing suppliers and US companies. Another opportunity, I think, for southeastern Massachusetts here is we can have these biomanufacturing hubs right here, southeastern Mass, central Mass, outside of 495 where the land is a little bit less expensive, but where we still have the talented workforce to support these. And I'm currently working on policy along with the Mass Biomedical Initiatives to support a basically made in America biomanufacturing initiative with an emphasis on how it can benefit the Bay State. I'll close by actually putting out kind of a call for input here, and that is on the Taunton River. One of the things I have noticed as I've gotten more engaged with economic development in southeastern Mass is that I think the Taunton River is an underutilized asset. The Taunton River, as we all know, was really a driving asset behind the Industrial Revolution here in southeastern Massachusetts. And at this point, though, it seems like the development along the Taunton River and the conception of the Taunton River's utility is siloed. We're working on Brayton Point, right? We want to get Brayton Point in a place where it can support an offshore wind cluster. Obviously, in Fall River itself, I've been majorly supportive, along with Senator Rodericks and the mayor, of the waterfront redevelopment. So we have conceptions of it as a hub for offshore wind maintenance and operations, as a place for housing development. We have some conceptions of it as a place for recreation. But I think we need a sort of Taunton River collective economic development vision, and one that I can help then fund and execute on. And the analogy that I draw on is work that I've done in the central part of my district, in Foxborough and Norton and North Attleboro, where they're all connected, these 6 towns, by Route 1, and in particular by the sewer system underneath Route 1, or what should be a contiguous sewer system underneath Route 1. These 6 towns all have their own conception of what they need from that sewer system for their own economic development. There's limited, I would say, coordination. And so what we did as an office is we brought them all together, got a relatively modest amount of federal funding to do a engineering overview of needs across the 6 towns that would knit it together and create a subsurface water infrastructure that would support economic development for all the towns in a way that people were able to share resources and assets. And then, based on the feedback from the engineering survey, invest in a triaged way about what was actually going to build, what are the things, the water treatment facilities or the sewer system upgrades that were needed across all 6 towns. That's the kind of model that I think we could apply to the Taunton River municipalities in conjunction with Serpent or other stakeholders to think about how do we take this incredible resource for the region and figure out all the ways that we can invest where 1 + 1 = 3 as opposed to just silos. That was a lot. I'm going to stop there and happy to take questions about any of the things I put out there or any national or international affairs.
So, thank you very much, by the way. Pleasure. Here's the first question from the audience. How are we going to combat excessive corporate profits at the expense of the consumer, i.e. the real cause of inflation?
Appreciate the question. I think that there's multifaceted drivers of inflation. Going back to 2020 and the pandemic, I think we had a number of things. One, we had a huge dislocation of supply relative to demand. So all of a sudden, everyone was ordered to be at home. They shifted from consuming services to consuming goods. Everybody wanted to buy, a new microwave as opposed to going to get their nails done. And that created this dislocation that really hadn't been seen in the economy since right after the end of World War II, which was the last time that an entire economy had to shift radically from one type of production to another. And so when you have all these people who no longer want services and instead they want goods, you've got a huge amount of demand for goods at the same time as the supply of those goods has gone down because China just shuttered 2/3 of its factories as part of its zero COVID policy. You got way more demand, much less supply. Econ 101, you get inflation. And we got inflation. We got inflation in a very big way. Then you added in Russia invaded Ukraine, 2 of the world's biggest suppliers of fertilizer and grain. So you got massive dislocations in supply there as well, and it just added to just as the post-COVID economy was starting to rebalance, you had that invasion in February of 2022, and we had a new round of dislocations. So it's taken us a while to get through that. We are getting through that, which is to say that inflation is down now to about 3%. And thankfully, real wages, meaning wage growth minus inflation, has actually gone up for those earning in the bottom 40% of the income distribution. So I think we're going to see that people's perceptions of the economy relative to price stability is going to improve, but it's going to take a while because inflation is incredibly demoralizing for consumers. And yes, there was absolutely some corporate profiteering as part of that as well. Let me talk about one area where the corporate profiteering needs to be cracked down on and where, frankly, it has very little to do with anything that happened in COVID or thereafter. It's just endemic to the supply chain, and that is with drug pricing. Right now, 3 pharmacy benefit managers, who are the middlemen of drug pricing, they're the ones who negotiate, use quotation marks there, they negotiate between manufacturers and pharmacists to get the prescription drugs from those who create them to those who then dispense them. And 3 of those pharmacy benefit managers own 80% of the market, and they're all 3 of them owned by giant health insurance companies. United Healthcare owns one, CVS Caremark owns one, and Cigna owns one. And these pharmacy benefit managers have captured something like $250 to $300 billion of value in between the drug makers and the patients. And they are not passing on their negotiated savings to patients at the countertop. It's not just patients who are sick and need medications who are suffering from this. They definitely are suffering by the out-of-pocket costs they pay. It's also employers. Because what happens is, as an employer, regardless of whether you're self-insuring for health benefits or you're contracting out those health benefits, you are almost certainly using a benefits consultant and a pharmacy benefit manager to negotiate these drug price savings on your behalf, because very few employers are going to have that kind of in-house expertise. And I got to say, the track record of these benefits consultants and pharmacy benefit managers of doing what's right for the employees and the employers is abysmal. It really is pretty scandalous. And it's in sharp contrast to the kind of advice and counsel that employers get for retirement benefits. The retirement benefits system actually works relatively well in the sense that because of regulation and because of competition, the access that employees get to good retirement plans and the advice that employers get about how to offer them is relatively sound. That same system is not being applied to health benefits, and whether that's hospitals or drug prices. Some of that is state, but mostly it's federal. And I've pushed a series of pieces of legislation about pharmacy benefit manager reform and benefit consultant reform that basically, at the end of it, requires that they be fiduciaries to employers. That's what it comes down to. You wouldn't work with a retirement consultant who is not a fiduciary to you and to your employees. And the same thing should apply to these health benefits consultants. They have to have a duty of prudence and a duty of loyalty.
Thank you. Taking a step back to Taunton River question that you asked. Do you foresee the Brightman Street Bridge being raised?
That's it's a dicey issue in these parts. I'm going to be highly deferential to the community. I want to know what the dynamics are there. Obviously, if it becomes a choke point for our ability to build a thriving offshore wind operations and maintenance hub, that needs to be looked at. The days of we've evolved now beyond the days of thinking about this as LNG. It's now offshore wind, right? And so maybe we can reconsider that. But I need to check back in with state and local officials to understand the dynamics.
Good answer. There's an outside possibility they may say they need to check with federal officials too. But, I can't guarantee that. So a couple other questions. First, do you have any comment or, today's a tough day along the East Coast and a tough day in Baltimore. Do you have any comment or knowledge or feedback on what happened today?
I'm certainly tracking what happened, and it's a tragedy. And I'm thinking about both the individuals who are the subject of these search and rescue efforts, and of course the families as well. It's the worst nightmare you can think of, right? I think all of us have those fleeting. You're driving across a bridge, and everybody has that fleeting thought, and then it actually happens when it's just horrendous. Obviously, the navigator of that ship, there's going to need to be criminal accountability unless there is some other cause given, but that was totally unacceptable. And it's going to be highly disruptive for greater Baltimore, and I think they're going to need to have the same sense of urgency and teamwork that we're going to try to bring to Rhode Island.
Thank you. So thank you for the recent increase in Head Start funding. To support economic growth, how can we support early childhood education so parents can work?
Yeah. I think early education is maybe the single best investment that we can make in this country. The amount of money that we spend on the first 8 years of life versus the amount of money that we spend on the last 8 years of life in this country, I think are really asymmetric in how much return on investment that we get. The science of cognitive and socio-emotional development, and frankly just common sense as a parent, tells us that it's very challenging. It would be very, very hard to ever spend and invest too much in those formative years. I think one of the things we have to do is pay and treat early educators better. I speak with a lot of early educators and early educator administrators who are losing faculty to Amazon or delivery services. And there's nothing wrong with those other jobs. They're good jobs. But I think that is the wrong axis of competition to expose our early educators to. They need to be paid and treated with the kind of respect that says what you are doing is critically important for our future, and we're going to put the resources behind that. It's not only salary, it's also equipping them with the wraparound services that they need to be successful in the classroom. Because you can pay people more, but if you're still setting them up for failure, you're going to get burnout, and you're going to have retention and recruitment challenges. And then we also have to be cognizant, and I know that the Head Start in Fall River has raised this, we've got to be cognizant of well-meaning federal regulations that are actually counterproductive. and making sure that we're not passing down unfunded mandates that end up really just increasing class sizes or even worse, preventing student access.
Thank you. So last year it was uncovered that the Baker administration mistakenly used $2.5 billion of federal funds to pay for unemployment benefits during the COVID-19 state of emergency. Can you give us any feedback or comment on where that stands and how the payback was looking?
My understanding is the federal government is requiring that that be paid back. I do not have the latest information, though, from the Healy admin on that.
Okay. From the legislature, we're hearing that they haven't heard yet, so.
I think it may still be under negotiation, but I'm not privy to those negotiations.
Well, if you are, it would be great if the federal government would forgive it. So
Hey, that's all your money, too. I mean, state or federal, it's still your money.
it is, but, you know, anything you could do would be greatly appreciated. You've covered a lot of the topics, which is good. It tells us that you're on the same page as us in many ways. But the migrant crisis, the state of Massachusetts emergency shelter system faces extreme capacity and funding challenges. A portion of these individuals and families are migrants who are here to work and contribute. And we've heard that the Healy administration's frustration regarding the federal government's lack of action on the border and work permits. Do you see Congress taking action to address the emergency we face here in Massachusetts?
Governor Healy is right to be frustrated. It's Congress's fault. She's totally right. It's been Congress's fault for 30 years. We haven't passed meaningful immigration reform really since I've been alive. And that's unconscionable. And it's particularly acute right now because what's happened in the last 10 years, but particularly in the last 5 years, is an acceleration of a long-standing challenge. We've seen the U.S. economy is quite strong from a job creation perspective. We've got lots of jobs, basically one big help wanted sign on this economy, particularly for healthcare, construction, home care, jobs that admit of people without college or even high school degrees in some instances. So we have this big, giant osmosis as an economy trying to pull in workforce. That's one driver. The other driver is decline of governance and societal conditions in the Central American countries, Honduras, El Salvador, Ecuador, Haiti, of course, not Central American, but we're seeing, unfortunately, crime and poverty increase, not decrease, over the last decade, which is pushing people up as our economy is pulling people in. And then while that's been happening, in between this push factor and the pull factor has been Mexico. And unfortunately, under this recent president, AMLO, the drug cartels, two of them in particular in northern Mexico, have gone from being, sort of organized bandits to multinational corporations. Is how to think about them. These aren't some guys driving around with weapons in the back of a pickup truck. These are sophisticated multinational corporate entities that are trafficking fentanyl by pulling it in from China and then pushing it across the border, killing 100,000 Americans a year. And they are trafficking humans across the Darien Gap and charging a huge amount for doing that as well. So we have this challenge where we got 60 million people living south of the border earning $1 a day or less. We got a big help wanted sign on the U.S. economy. And in between those two factors, we have got a corporatized, efficient system for pulling those people north and treating them inhumanely. This would be a problem whether we had a Democrat or a Republican president. This really is not, it need not be a purely partisan approach to this. This is a problem systemically, not politically. And unfortunately, immigration has become the single most challenging issue in Washington to address, number one. And the simple reason, and here I'm absolutely going to point fingers, the simple reason is that Donald Trump wants to campaign in 2024 on the border. He doesn't, that's not even implicit. He has said that publicly and repeatedly. He needs this issue against Joe Biden. So when we had a bipartisan border security deal in the Senate, this was a bipartisan deal negotiated by a liberal senator from Connecticut and a conservative senator from Oklahoma, made a lot of compromises, went down into the fine-grained issues about funding, about changes to asylum and visa authorizations. It was not comprehensive, but it was solid. I supported it. It was torpedoed, and it was torpedoed by the Republicans because they realized that politically solving this was way worse than campaigning on it. So I'm frustrated. I don't see the prospects, frankly, of congressional action on immigration. I'm ready to vote for it. I'm a co-sponsor of bipartisan immigration reform in the House. I supported the Senate version of it. But unfortunately, the Speaker and Mitch McConnell in the Senate have told their members that we're not moving on this in '24. The president may be able to take executive actions, but he can't create money and he can't create laws on his own. He needs Congress's support.
I'm going to give this to you to read because that's worse than my handwriting.
Taunton River, when are you
The question
thinking?
is, when do you think you might convene people to talk about a plan
Yeah.
for the Taunton River?
So I've discussed this with Serpide, and they may be the better convener than me. I'm open to that concept. I'm still kind of learning myself. I want to take a trip up and down the Taunton River actually, and see. I've seen parts of it, but not the whole thing. But you tell me, when should I? I'm sort of here to be a convener, and to organize, but not necessarily to drive. These things are successful when there's buy-in organically at the local level. So let's talk after and see if we can move something forward.
Nothing personal, Sarah. There, I could not read that. And if you look at this one, the handwriting on this is like perfect. I don't know who wrote this one, but the handwriting is perfect. Gary, if I just got you.
It's not mine, it's my wife's.
Well, now you know you're going to hear it at dinner tonight. You mentioned new manufacturing opportunities for our region, such as maritime industry initiatives, drones, manufacturing, biomedical, offshore wind. How should we as a business community and school districts respond as you work with your way to support and prepare for the anticipated growth?
Yeah, I'm not sure this is going to be a bolt of insight, but I do think it is the most important issue, which is workforce development. The thing that Massachusetts is always going to be able to, or always should be able to outcompete on, is the talent of our workforce. People are not going to come here for land prices. They can find cheaper land elsewhere. They're probably not going to come here for the most favorable tax regime of anywhere in the country. Florida or Texas is always going to be undercutting us. It's not going to be the weather. They're coming here because we're super smart and we can build really tricky stuff. That's what Massachusetts has always been good at, whether it's medical devices or large molecules or wind turbines, semiconductors even. That's what we're good at. And I think the great opportunity we have is, I think, more integrated career and technical training between the high school level and the employers. There are so many employers I talk to who say, we just want people with a good work ethic, who are here ready to learn, and who have kind of some foundational skills. And we're willing to take on a lot of the sort of risk of workforce training for the next 6 months to a year, but we just need the people and we need the attitude. And I think that's the opportunity that we have, is to create that base layer of motivated, talented people.
I would agree with that answer, and I certainly, we have some great opportunities here. NOWI, the National Offshore Wind Institute, is just a great example of how Bristol Community College has stepped up their game, and UMass Dartmouth and SMass, and the work that you guys are doing is fantastic as well. So we're fortunate with some of the workforce development training that we already have going on, but I do agree. So this will be, unless I get another question from the crowd. This is an inane question that Ian and I talked about this morning, and I think Ian thought I was kind of nuts for asking you, but I'm going to ask you anyway. I don't know if you're a college basketball fan or college athletics fan or not, But, and I'm not gonna ask you who you picked to win the national championship. It's a little more economics related. The economics in college sports has changed dramatically in the last couple of years. And then this year, recently, it was approved in the court system, I think it was the court system, that the Dartmouth University athletes can unionize, which is gonna change everything even more as other universities step up. Because a few years ago, Northwestern tried to do that, Northwestern athletes, and it got shot down. I don't know the specific differences, but maybe one of our labor attorneys out there can figure it out for me, Gary.
Not today.
But my question is where, with the way college sports are changing, a lot of people are saying that Congress has to get involved. So what do you think of that?
First, this is not an area where I'm particularly well-versed, so I'll just be upfront about that. Lori Trahan, my colleague from Pioneer Valley, would be better positioned to speak on this. She's a former college athlete. She's made name, image, likeness legislation one of her clarion issues in Congress on the Energy and Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction. So I would look to her on some of this stuff. I think it's clear from what I'm seeing, just even as an interested observer, that the current system is not stable, right? Like there's clearly between unionization, between NIL deals, where you have some college students making millions of dollars a year in ways that are outside the system. Clearly that there needs to be upgrades. My first phone call on this would be to Charlie Baker. He's now the head of the NCAA. He's a smart guy. I would love to hear from him what his thoughts are, and he has been on the Hill more and more, and when I talk to him, I'll let you know.
I'd love to hear what Charlie has to say on that. I didn't envy him when he was the governor, and I don't envy him now. When
He's a glutton. He took over a failing health insurance company. He became governor of Massachusetts. He's heading the NCAA. The guy likes a hard job.
Yeah, that's an understatement. Is there at least one more question? Certainly.
I'll just say one question. Great presentation, Congressman. I'm just going to the question on the Taunton River. I think you have some knowledge of that.
Yeah.
It's a wild and scenic river. And Bill Napolitano, who's now retired, he's the environmental plan of the Serpent, helped organize all the communities, including Florida and Taunton. He's still around, but definitely Serpent is the way to start.
Yeah.
Because all the communities have to buy into it, and there is going to be some, obviously the legislation itself wasn't meant to, thwart business by any stretch, but was enacted to protect the river. So they're definitely a good person, a good organization to go through. And if Bill Napolitano's around, he's the one that really spearheaded all the communities, did the real dirty work to get approval for that. So,
Sounds like someone I should talk to, yeah. That deep local knowledge and experience.
thank you for your presentation. Really good.
Thank you, Garth. So, Congressman, thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it. We always love to have you here. Without COVID is always better.
Yes.
But thank you very much. Thank you again to our friends at Fall River Municipal Credit Union for sponsoring. And thank you. It's been great having you and great to see you again.
I appreciate the time and thoughtful questions.
Thank you.